of America's most revered founding fathers, icons of intellect, duty, and liberty, left behind more than monumental legacies? What if their genetic inheritance carried a darker burden, passed down through sons who died young, suffered from chronic illness, or spiraled into mental breakdowns? These are the stories rarely told. The fragile heirs born into greatness, but haunted by hidden bloodline flaws. Before we dig into these private tragedies and buried letters, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll never miss the real stories behind the familiar names. Let's discover America's true legacy of power and of genetic fragility. What did greatness cost? This is the story of sons born into privilege and expectation, and yet haunted by bodies that failed them. We lionize the founding fathers as rational, moral exemplars. We elevate their words in glass cases. But beneath those pen strokes lies an unspoken legacy: physical fragility, early death, mental instability. A tragedy woven through generations, hidden in silence and painful letters never meant for public eyes. Begin with Thomas Jefferson. He fathered children both in Monticello and beyond, and while much attention goes to Sally Hemings and her descendants, fewer recall his legitimate line. His eldest grandson, Peter Carr, who carried Jefferson blood and the names of revolutionaries written into his bones, fell ill at age 7 with persistent fevers, convulsions, and tremors. His father John wrote in grief. He could scarcely speak in his final days, leaving behind pages of mourning. Peter's brother Charles suffered from recurring epileptic fits, painful, unpredictable, and isolating, effectively erased from school and public life. A physician visiting Monticello noted pale cheeks and weak limbs, but blamed nervous constitution, a euphemism for inherited weakness. In Boston, John Quincy Adams, who would become president, fathered several sons. The eldest, George, was born with a spine curved so severely that he could not stand upright without support. He died at age 15 after years in a corrective brace, while letters home reference, a mind sharp as his father's, but a body denied its potential. His brother Charles endured symptoms of chronic rheumatism, which, combined with suspected mild intellectual disabilities, made him unsuited for public life. The family buried both with private humility in the family tomb under St. John's in Quincy, Mass., far from the public's gaze. Across the sea, in Virginia, the Randolphs, cousins and in-laws of Jefferson, were known for their intermarriages. Francis, the eldest son of Jefferson's nephew, was described in family diaries as pale and thin, afflicted with uncontrollable shakes and insomnia from childhood. His sister later wrote, "He was gentle but exhausted. We feared for him always. He died ultimately of consumption in his 20s. His younger cousin, also named Thomas, suffered from catatonic episodes in adolescence, requiring padded rooms and constant supervision. 2 generations later, the same Randolph lineage, by then still practicing intra-family marriages, produced sons with similarly limited lifespans and congenital deformities. Benjamin Franklin's name does not carry a direct American political dynasty of sons, yet his nephews and grandsons showed what happens to not only one bloodline, but many branches. Franklin's grandnephew William, who went on to found a Philadelphia publishing house, was born underweight and deaf in one ear. Dyslexia plagued him through childhood, making school impossible, a perceived moral failing rather than a rooted neurodevelopmental disorder. He eventually joined the family business, but later died suddenly in his 30s of dropsy, described as gouted swelling, though modern doctors suspect cardiac enlargement or hereditary kidney disease. Perhaps most tragic are the descendants of George Washington, whose name is synonymous with strength. His stepchildren, through Martha, descended into cycles of intermarriage among Virginia planters. One great-grandson, Bushrod Washington Jr., was born with cleft palate and partial deafness. He died in a riding accident at age 20, but medical records, and a handwritten note later uncovered, indicate he struggled with speech impediment and social isolation his whole life. He rarely left the estate. Another descendant named Lawrence was institutionalized after suffering mania and paranoia in his early 20s. An asylum ledger from Utica lists his diagnosis as melancholic exaltation, possibly bipolar breakdown exacerbated by inherited brain chemistry. More shocking are the Madison line. President James Madison himself had no children, but his extended family did. A nephew named Richard Madison, born with a severe curvature of the spine and lungs limited by chest deformity, died as an infant. Another cousin suffered from congenital heart disease and epileptic seizures. Letters from physicians speak of pale features, rapid breathing, and mental fog. Despite immense political prestige, the family struggled across generations, with sons unable to serve in public or even marry. What unites these stories, not just burden, is pattern. Marriage circles within the elite circulated power and property, but also doubled down on genetic weakness. Cousin marriages, repeated partner pairs across generations, and isolated social spheres produced inherited conditions. Epilepsy, spinal deformities, psychological instability, early adult mortality, and chronic pain. The families rarely spoke. Medical language veiled the truth. Nervous temperament, frail constitution, melancholy relapse. Children who died were often labeled infanta vanquished by consumption. Clipped entries exist in local newspapers. Eldest son of prominent politician passes after brief illness, aged 17. No obituaries mention genetic inheritance. Yet private letters, hidden in boxes, attic trunks, or university archives, tell of tears, failed marriages, broken wills, and portraits covering empty cradles. Brothers who never grew tall, cousins who recoiled from touch. One Monticello maid recalled a Randolph cousin who had to be fed through a siphon as a child, his jaw weak and neck frail. Another Virginia physician described symmetrical joint deterioration in a young woman whose brother had died by age 18. By the late 19th century, these curses began to fade, not through medical insight, but through social change. New money entered cities. The old bloodlines began intermarrying with outsiders, weakening inherited risk. Progressive mental health laws and medical revelations reclassified hysteria and nervous temperament into treatable categories. Some families finally acknowledged genetic risk and discouraged cousin unions. Ironically, this was the beginning of eugenics-era America, the elite promoting sterilization to curb inherited mental illness, often unaware they were targeting cousins of their own blood. But by then, the damage had etched itself into graves,
Subscribe to my
family
channel.
names, and fading portraits. The founding fathers remain icons. Monuments honor them. Their stories are taught in schools. Yet their sons, the next generation born into glory, were often too fragile to survive it. Their names and their faces are now gone. Only whispers remain. But the pattern is unmistakable. Power inherited with wreckage. They were the next generation, expected to carry the torch of revolution and ideals. But many collapsed under their own blood. Before we witnessed fragile bodies and stunted lives, now we uncover what clinicians, historians, and private journals reveal about mental decline, failed marriages, and creative brilliance extinguished too soon. In the Randolph family, a grandson named Francis Thomas Randolph Jr., born meager and frail, managed to attend university briefly, only to return home after emotional breakdowns described as loss of mind in family correspondence. His brother Edward later wrote, he spoke of visions, of fire and blood, in his delirium. We heard him cry out at night. He was taken to a private asylum in Baltimore. Maryland medical records denote his diagnosis as melancholia with delusions, while a modern doctor might suggest bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. The family quietly erased his name from genealogical records. Photographs taken before his breakdown still survive. Glassy-eyed, head tilted, worn academic robes contrasted with haunted emptiness. Meanwhile, Jefferson's Carr line saw more tragedy. His young son Thomas Carr, named after his illustrious grandfather, emerged with severe developmental delays and seizures. A physician's note describes him as nonverbal and often unresponsive. Yet family letters praised his gentle nature, a sad euphemism. He never learned to read. His elders called him a child forever lost in time. Thomas died in his 20s, but no public record marks his passing, only ledger entries and a folded note found decades later. In Massachusetts, descendants of John Quincy Adams wrestled with substance use and chronic illness. One grandson, Samuel A. Adams, struggled with insomnia and persistent skin rashes. After prescribed medications, he developed dependency issues. A personal pharmacist's note censors the details. Relief sought, but body rejected it. Mind grew faint. He died alone in his Boston townhouse, and his obituaries mention a long, inexplicable illness, but mention no cause, no shame exactly, just distance. In even more obscure circles, the lives overlap with early attempts at genetic science. Harvard and Johns Hopkins researchers in the late 1880s began opening morbidity files of elite families. A Dr. Caldwell in Boston wrote privately, "The Carr and Randolph lines present striking similarity in physical constitution, mental irregularity, and affliction by epilepsy." His limited study could have been revolutionary, but was suppressed by family donors afraid of scandal. It became, instead, a whisper in medical archives. The long-term consequence. Many of these wealthy families left no male heirs to inherit their estates, forcing property sales or marriages into new bloodlines. Houses in Virginia and Massachusetts were sold under quiet settles. Portraits were repainted without sickly children. Genealogies were rewritten. The names remained Jefferson, Adams, Madison, but their flesh parts, the sons, erased. Some of the afflicted exhibited creative gifts before their decline. William Franklin Randolph, born into what remained of the once mighty Virginia Randolph estate, showed early talent in mechanics and writing. Two unfinished manuscripts survive, a novel reimagining the Revolution and designs for an advanced water pump. But they stopped cold at age 14, coinciding with the onset of tremors and psychosis symptoms. A final family entry notes, "Expected genius ended in sorrow." Other families wiped names altogether. In the case of the Adams line, one cousin with suspected bipolar disorder was committed to a Rhode Island asylum mid-1800s. The ward was anonymous, listed as AQ, Adams, no relation. His death certificate lists general paralysis without surname. His name vanished completely. In legal records, property again reveals underlying shame. Wills occasionally include clauses. Should a descendant be incapable by reason of bodily infirmity or mental frailty, inheritance shall pass to distant kin. These stipulations hint at deeper truths. Several estates mention beneficiaries found unfit to marry or unable to serve in public. The same families that nurtured revolution refused to nurture their own descendants. By the early 1900s, such patterns began to break. New wealth from immigrants flooded cities. Elite families finally blended with outsiders. The next generation of marriage was interracial, international, and untainted. Modern medical knowledge reclassified epilepsy, depression, and congenital deformity as treatable or manageable. Museums opened, archives were digitized, and some descendants rediscovered, faced with the choice of preserving or confronting the truth. The legacy of these sickly sons remains in broken chairs, empty cradles in ancestral homes, and blank entries in genealogical ledgers. It echoes in the mental health debates today, not merely about individuals, but a system that punished bodies carrying inherited pain. If this hidden genetic curse shaped America's greatest families, what does it mean for how we understand legacy, health, and power? These stories were buried so deep they almost vanished completely. As we trace the fading footsteps of America's forgotten heirs, sons born not into triumph, but into trembling bodies and tormented minds, we uncover a side of history rarely taught in textbooks. Behind the ideals of liberty and independence were bloodlines burdened by fragility, silence, and shame. These were not just children of revolutionaries, but children of inherited pain. If their stories were hidden, it wasn't by accident. It was to preserve the myth, the image of perfect men building a perfect nation. But history is never perfect, and legacy doesn't always survive the body it's born into. If this glimpse into America's hidden bloodlines moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the untold chapters of history, stories of forgotten daughters, lost sons, and everything they weren't allowed to leave behind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next dark corner of the past.